Welcome to today's webinar on comparative world literatures, research methodology. It is my great pleasure to welcome our esteemed chairperson, Honorable Vice Chancellor Ma'am, Professor Nandini Sahu, and our distinguished speakers, Dr. Sagar Kumar Sharma, Ms. Nitika Gulati, and Ms. Dikshya Samantarai. In this webinar, we will explore the research methodologies that underpin comparative literary studies, examining the ways in which scholars approach the study of literature across cultures and languages. So, before we begin, I would like to introduce Honorable Vice Chancellor of Hindi University, West Bengal, Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am. Professor Nandini Sahu is a distinguished academician, creative writer, and currently serving as the Vice Chancellor of Hindi University, West Bengal. She previously held the position of Director at the School of Foreign Languages, IGNOU, New Delhi. As a renowned Indian English poet and folklorist, Professor Sahu has garnered widespread recognition with 21 books to her credit, making her a best selling author on Amazon. Her academic excellence is underscored by double gold medals in both graduation and post graduation. Professor Sahu's contributions to English studies have earned her the prestigious Literary Award Gold Medal from the Honorable Vice President of India. Her impressive array of accolades includes the coveted Michael Madhusudan Academy Award and Lifetime Achievement Award in 2024. As a professor of English, her research interests are diverse and far-reaching, encompassing new literatures, critical theory, and many more. Now, without any delay, I would like to request Honorable Vice Chancellor of Hindi University, Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, for the inaugural speech. Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. I'm so sorry about this problem happening here. There is some accident outside the building, so there is massive power cut, and I'm not able to join through my video. But anyway, I'm so glad to see all of you here. Paramita, thank you so much for conducting the webinar so smoothly. I have confidence that you will be able to hold it till the end the way you have been doing. Many congratulations to you. And about the three speakers for today, Dr. Sagar Sharma and Dr. Nitika and Dr. Dikshya, they are my students. I have already posted it on social media, the titles of their papers, and the way they are going to have a discussion on the research methodology of comparative world literatures. It's a very, very important subject. When it comes to comparative world literatures, usually people approach it in a very simplistic manner. They think when it is comparative world literatures, you have to compare one language or literature with another language or literature. This is how people have understood. The students, the scholars, have understood comparative world literature in a very simplistic manner. So when I was having a discussion with my students about the Hindi University lecture series on comparative world literature, we had a serious concern that how to approach the subject, what should be the research methodology. So that is when we came up with the idea that my research scholars, my students sitting here as the speakers for the day, I am so proud to invite them as a part of this lecture series, which is creating ripples all over academia. The country is talking about this Hindi University comparative world literature lecture series, and I'm sure that my students, the way they have been making me proud forever through their research and publications and their PhD thesis and their classroom teaching and everything related to academia, uh, their collaborations with me as equal partners as far as research is concerned. I tell them that no one is working under me, you are working with me, and they have taken it very seriously. They try to come up to the standards that I expect from them. So I hope and I am rather sure that this particular program today is going to be very meaningful, very substantial, because today we are talking business. We are talking about the research methodology, how to approach comparative world literatures. And three of them, Dr. Diksha, Dr. Nitika, and Dr. Sagar, they have done their research in subjects which are not related to each other. But somehow, I hope that with the discourse, with the research, and the preparations that they have for today, we will come up with some answer to the question, what is the research methodology? How do we approach this very important subject? What are the things that we should teach in in a university or in a PG department when it is comparative world literature? And what pedagogy should be followed by the teachers and the scholars and the students when it comes to comparative world literature? There are many questions. My students and my colleagues in Hindi University, they keep asking me about those, and I hope that my students will be in a position to answer to their queries, their questions, and the lecture is going to be recorded. At the end of the lecture, I hope our students will ask questions to the speakers for the day. I will be here, I will be listening to all of you, and let's hope that we are going to have some meaningful discourse in this program today. Thank you so much, Paramita. Please proceed.
Your audio
You
is,
are not audible.
we cannot hear you, Dr. Paramita.
Sorry. Thank you, ma'am. Now, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Sagar Kumar Sharma, who is an assistant professor at the Department of English, School of Media Studies and Humanities, Manav Rachna International Institute of Research and Studies. Dr. Sagar is the author of an edited book, Writers Speakers Volume 1, and several research papers published in national and international journals of high quality index and repute. A poet at heart, a researcher by temperament, and essentially a lover of art. Along with this, Dr. Sagar is a member of the editorial boards of some important and recognized journals. Now, without any delay, I would like to request Dr. Sagar Kumar Sharma for his very enlightening speech. Dr. Sagar Kumar Sharma.
Uh, Thank you, Dr. Paramita, for this rather generous introduction. Uh, Honorable Madam Vice Chancellor, Hindi University, Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am, who happens to be the sheet anchor of all my research till day, the faculty member at Hindi University, everyone participating in this important lecture, my friend Nitika Gulati, Dikshya Samantarai, who have been my fellow researchers, uh, and all the participants who are here to listen to us. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude for their time and their presence. And this is really a very proud moment for me to be called by the Hindu University in this very important lecture series, which, as Madam rightly said, has created ripples in the academia, and people are talking about it. And at the outset, I must say that it gives me chills to think of the speakers that have spoken here and to fit into their shoes. It is really a very, very daunting task. But anyhow, I am ready to take the challenge. And talking about the comparative literature, I would also like to first thanks and extend my gratitude to the Department of English, Manarashna International Institute of Research and Studies, my colleagues there, my head, the dean, and everyone else who have been very supportive. And I congratulate also Manarashna University for fostering the atmosphere of research. Now, talking about comparative literature, like we were talking, me and Nandini ma'am were talking about brainstorming the idea of what comparative literature exactly is and how the scholars and researchers in the field approach this particular subject. And we see that this has been narrowed down to just mere juxtaposition of two texts and comparison based on the themes and other stuff. But comparative literature basically is much more than that. So, for as far as my understanding goes, that comparative literature, is not merely a study of texts from different cultures or languages. It is a critical discipline that fosters dialogues across boundaries. And to sustain this critical engagement, certainly research methodology plays a vital role in offering structure, theoretical depth, and academic credibility to the field study. Uh, this lecture is divided into two parts, as the title specifies. I'll be talking about research methodologies in comparative literature, theory and praxis. So the two part of this speech is divided into two segments, theory and praxis. So for theory, and that is what I'll begin with. Uh, for theory, I would like to talk about how selection of theory plays an important role in research in general and research in comparative literature in particular. And for the praxis part, I would like to demonstrate the application of suitable research methodologies with reference to American and British drama. And the playwrights that I chose to work with here for this lecture are Arthur Miller and John Osborne. Of course, I'll be sticking to one or two plays by them because the oeuvre is very wide and vast. So beginning the discussion on the theoretical and methodological aspect of research in comparative literature, one may choose two or more authors and their work chosen from across disciplines. And in this way, we can keep the geographical location of the selected authors same or different. And the second and more obvious choice would be, which usually scholars do, is the selection of text from across cultures. The possibility of choosing all these three categories together should not also be negated, meaning thereby one can choose to work across disciplines and at the same time across cultures. So I would be talking about the application of these three methodologies in the context of Arthur Miller and John Osborne. Once we have identified whether to study an author across culture or across disciplines or both, we proceed to the identification of some common grounds. These could be social, political, economic backdrops, or some global events, etc. While discussing the praxis of research methodology in comparative literature, we shall look at the effects of the two world wars on the economy, the rise of the middle class, and we can see an aporia shift in the way people looked at the world and at themselves during and after the war years. Since my time frame is the First World War and the Second World War, I'll be referring to that as the context of my research. The next step is to select an approach. Once we have decided whether we are going to talk about authors across the disciplines and across cultures or both at the same time, the next step in research methodology would be to select an approach, how the research topics to be approached. Usually, thematic study comes in handy when dealing with literatures of different regions on the same or similar subjects. Next, we could do genre studies. It is another sensible way to approach comparative literature. For example, we could assess the growth and development of drama both along the line of time and across various geographies. We could talk about drama's evolution from Plato to Aristotle, or maybe to present. Or we could talk about drama from Greece and drama from England or from the US, or all at once. In genre studies, one could also study the influence of literature of one place on the literature of a different place. For instance, the journey of drama from realism to absurdism. This is an important way to approach literature. Even the growth of a genre through ages, like tragedy at the time of Plato and tragedy at the time of Miller and tragedy at present, the change is phenomenal. Because the questions of human existence, of our identities keep on shifting, we need to create a space for change in our research methodologies, in how we approach our topics. Next theoretical framework could be intertextuality. The reference to works by other authors often make for good and scholarly engagement. European realism's influence on American drama, for example. Also, European existentialism influence on American literature. You could see this effect from Sartre to LB. You know, next, I think I would talk about the importance of selecting a theoretical framework for research, which actually is both the theory and the praxis part. And I'll be taking the example of Arthur Miller. And I have chosen cultural materialism as my theoretical framework, and I like to showcase what alternative theories are available, were available to me as well, and what alternative theories are available, and how exactly would you approach a particular theoretical framework for your research, something that I did for my PhD. So let's begin with understanding what theoretical framework is and what it does to a research. Theoretical framework gives a direction to a research work. Work of art, especially literature, are so open-ended mostly that it becomes difficult to derive a universal meaning at all times. Different readers interpret a text differently, and they can all be considered correct in their own ways. This creates a situation wherein nothing is false or incorrect, and this further leads to conflict and ambiguity as to the meaning of a text. Thus, to reach to a conclusive point, researchers tend to undertake their research within a theoretical framework. It helps in, if nothing else, keeping the research objectives defined. While reading Arthur Miller, the two most common frameworks that are usually taken up by researchers are Marxism and New Historicism. So I would like to begin this discussion with my reason for not selecting Marxism or New Historicism as the theoretical framework of this research endeavor. Essentially, Marxism talks about presence of inequality in society, that it holds to be the root cause of a number of social evils. With a special attention to economic disparity, Marxists claim that there are, broadly, two categories into which a population can be divided: the haves and the have-nots. The capitalist class or the bourgeois are the haves that possess large majority of the wealth and the means of production. The proletariats or the have-nots are the ones with virtually negligible share of wealth and means of production under their control. This should create a sense of depravity in the vast majority of population that is being tricked into the vicious circle of poverty by the haves, but surprisingly, it does not. The Marxists offer an explanation of the way the haves manage to fool the have-nots. Marx and Friedrich Engels, the leading figures of Marxism, established that the capitalists justify their modes of production through the help of state institutions such as culture, education, and religion. They create a narrative that makes the disparity in society look so natural, like the consequence of a preordained order of things, and not one made by humans. This Marx called false consciousness. Ideology and false consciousness are key concepts with regards to Marxism. Pramod K. Nair, in his Contemporary Literary and Cultural Theory, defines ideology as the writings, speeches, beliefs, and opinions, cultural practices basically, that assert the naturalness and necessity of economic practices. Nair further adds, the ideology, and I quote, the ideology is, therefore, an instrument of power because it helps prop up the dominant classes by naturalizing an exploitative relationship and convincing the working classes that this is how things are. Quote close. False consciousness, or as it is alternatively also called ideology, helps to create a make-believe situation that enables the dominant class to reinforce their power over the oppressed and marginalized classes, because ideology serves as a system of beliefs that naturalizes the unequal power relations and leads the oppressed to accept it as natural, a given, and as social evident and is self-evident and therefore beyond questioning. And this false consciousness is so subtly created through different modes of cultural production that the inherent economic disparity in society looks natural. And false consciousness is so frequently repeated that it becomes a normative for the deprived classes to remain deprived. So much so that they accept their condition and stop asking for equal distribution of wealth and resources. All modes of cultural production, including literature, is thus studied as modes of power. Literary texts are studied as texts of domination. A Marxist interpretation consciously outlines the ways in which the different modes of cultural productions maintain power relations in society. In a way, Marxists question the workings of capitalist society and deem it to be unfit for the equality point of view. From theoretical point of view, Marxism is an excellent framework to study power relations in a culture. The vision of a society that Marxists propose is that of a classless society. Uh, it is arguably an applaudable vision. Of course, there is no doubt about it that this would be a very welcome change if the society was, exactly classless and there was no division as such. But unfortunately, some practical issues become challenges in the way of realizing the Marxist vision. Some issues remain unresolved. For example, how exactly the equal distribution of wealth and resources is to be brought to effect. Human society is not a group of men and women, and I think you would agree with me that we as societies are not groups of men and women with same or similar attributes, abilities, skills, and qualifications. Despite the essential greatness of the belief that all men are created equal, not all men remain equal, at least after they have been created. Keeping the in-depth explanation of why men do not remain equal, a discussion actually that ends up nowhere because it involves a never-ending series of blaming in which everyone seems a victim and everyone seems fair in their position. So we better focus on issue of implementation because there is an enormous scope for discussion when we talk about Marxism and when we talk about equal distribution of wealth and resources and a classless society, how exactly this implementation is to be done. I mean, this again leads to a crisis of conclusion. You will never end up at a conclusion because people who earn a lot, there are ways through which they earn. I understand if we are talking about the industrialist and mindless and reckless accumulation of wealth. I understand their wealth might be redistributed for the betterment of society and people at large. But then there are unresolved questions, like I said. The question then is, how do we maintain a distinction between the pay scale for a job that requires a very complex set of skills that are achieved through years of training and education and a job that requires relatively lesser skills and even no qualification? There is hardly any practical solution to such an issue. Also, if we are to blame absence of equality of opportunity, which I often am told that, sir, probably the equality of opportunity is the reason for the difference in two persons or various people's occupational positions. We know that is not true. And that is also not a very easy problem. Equality of opportunity, and I maintain there is no empirical proof can result in equality of outcome. And when we talk about equality and things like equating equality of opportunity with equality of outcome, we have to again be very careful as researchers. In day-to-day discourses, we make such tall claims, but then when you come to the application part of this, you will see that this is not as simple as that, because then you will have to define what equality means to you. You'll have to define what equality of opportunity would mean to you, and then what are the parameters by which, or what are the yardsticks by which you define both the opportunity, the equality, and also the outcome. So of course, I have no disagreement that equality of opportunity is everyone's right and it must be ensured at all costs by all means. Also, the principal tenets of Marxism remain solid in their proposition of the hegemonic forces in society, no doubt. Power relations operate within social, political, and economic systems and tend to corrupt them beyond repair. What I just said was actually a brief discussion of the principal tenets of Marxism. And I understand there are certain layers, but since within the scope of this presentation, I can touch only the surface and the practical problems because I'm talking about both theory and praxis. So now, since the concern here is to define my choice of cultural materialism over Marxism, I better stick to that. You see, the text that I'm trying to refer to is All My Sons. And if time permits me later on, I would come to understand the politics of writing and I would like to talk about the crucible. But for the time being, I'll talk about All My Sons. And I'm also assuming that the audience is well versed with All My Sons, the plot line as such, because it is a very popular play and I have a very erudite and learned listener. So when you look closely at All My Sons, the play ends with Joe Keller committing suicide. And please keep in mind the Marxist tenets when I ask you, But what happens to the company? The company that Chris Keller believed to be thriving on the blood of 21 innocent pilots. The company that is, in fact, a determinant of class culture. Another important point to make here, and this time in the context of Death of a Salesman, another magnum opus by the great author Arthur Miller, the American dramatist, is that Miller does not portray capitalist structure or capitalist culture as entirely flawed, something which is arguably not Marxist. Because for the Marxist vision, everything, precisely everything about the capitalist culture is entirely flawed. While you look at when you look at the characters, you see that Willy Loman's friend, Charlie, he's a good man who always helps him with his finances. Charlie's son grows up to become a decently successful lawyer, a fact hard for Willie to digest, of course. So, absolutely everything about economic and social structure of this time in which the play has been placed, which is the First World War, does not seem to be wrong. Some critics have pointed out in their discussions that the two plays leave many questions unanswered. You see, one way of looking at how and why it is difficult to interpret Death of a Salesman and also All My Sons from Marxist point of view is to consider what Marxist criticism expects from the text and its author. The divide between the proletariat and the bourgeois was widening in the 1930s. We all are aware of the 1929 Wall Street crash, the rise of the middle classes, and a boom in American economy post First World War, and the emergence of superpowers uh, and new superpowers, so to say. And as a reaction to the rising power of the bourgeois, the proletariats created the cult of proletariat. They created a cult that they called the prolet cult. Marxist criticism of this phase expected a writer to dedicate his heart and soul to the cause of the proletariats. Prolet cult, the Marxist doctrine maintains that literature must be tendentious, party minded, optimistic, and heroic. It should be infused with a revolutionary romanticism, portraying heroes and prefiguring the future. This trend continued for long, and for so long that to scar the basic idea of Marxism that sought to identify the social gaps and class culture. The doctrine of the prolet cult sought to develop a distinctly proletarian art which would organize working class ideas and feelings towards collectivist rather than individualist goals. But when I look at Arthur Miller and his plays, it is not just about, of course, Willy Loman and the other protagonist in All My Sons, Joe Keller. They are definitely a representative of the class consciousness, or the sorry, collective consciousness, I should say. But then there is an element of individuality. As a matter of fact, we talk a lot about socialism. We talk a lot about Arthur Miller's plays as social dramas. So, if I understand it correctly, it has to represent society at large. It does, of course. Both his plays, actually, his entire oeuvre does represent society at large. But then there is always self versus self. Literature, and this is my advice to the researchers who seek to study research in comparative literature precisely. Most importantly, they should be very mindful of these facts, that the literature is not only about, a representation or a mirror of society, etc., etc. It is much more, and it is much beyond and above that. It is also about self versus the self. How do you locate yourself in a particular situation? And then, while we are talking about this, we also need to understand that there is inherently a political statement when we write a text. And I'm very carefully using my words when I say that the Honorable Vice Chancellor and I had conversations regarding this, and we did come to a conclusion, and that is all writing, I maintain all writing by default is political. So, and there is no reason to shy away from that. So, keeping these things in mind, a comparative literature researcher must also address the issues of personal, the identity of the individual, while looking at the larger picture. And this is where Marxism, while I was doing my research, somehow seemed to be a limited approach, if not, I would say, failed me. It was sometimes I felt that it was a very limited approach. And in this context, Terry Eagleton remarks, and I quote, there followed throughout 1940s and early 1950s a series of crippling literary decrees. Literature itself sank to a nadir of false optimism and uniform plots. Means there was a very that there was this idea of a very well made plot wherein there will be the haves and the have nots, and how one would be always in a position of struggle and destitute and trouble, so on and so forth. And coming back to the United States and Arthur Miller, the uncertain stance of Miller as to which way to go with his own art can be read as a result of the confusion that I discussed so far. And then Miller's plays are not only about the class conflict, like I said, but in any case, his art certainly does not succumb to the capitalist culture of class divide. And you'd be interested to know that a lot of debate followed when Miller wrote Death of a Salesman, and he beautifully writes in the intro. Excuse me for a second. In his introduction to the collected plays, Miller beautifully underlines this state of aporia and confusion when he says that, when Death of a Salesman was written, people were afraid. There was the general state of hysteria in the United States in the 1950s. Joseph McCarthy was there. And also, to the researchers here, I must say that something that Nandini ma'am has taught us thoroughly, that you must be very well aware of the social, political, economic situations, and also how personal politics makes a space amidst so much of politics going on. Okay, because at the end of everything, you have to assert your own identity as a researcher, as a scholar, uh, as a literati, and also as a human being, if nothing else. So, yeah, as far as the death of a salesman is concerned, there are more relevant questions to be asked, and they would be: number one, how infused with revolutionary romanticism Death of a Salesman actually is. Next question would be, how heroic is the death of the salesman? Because you see, there has to be, we are accustomed to the idea of, uh, fall of a great man from a great height, and that is also the Greek idea of tragedy. And here the researchers must also note that, when you talk about the development of drama, like I said at the outset of this presentation or this lecture, that you have to be also careful about the growth and development of the art and craft which you are dealing with, because much, and I repeat, much lies therein. Because uh, I'll quickly come to the American example of the American drama, but let me add here that if you look at the growth and development of drama, not just across the timeline, also across cultures, you see that the Aristotelian concept of drama, wherein there was six aspects that had to be included in order for a tragedy to be called a tragedy, and then the most important was spectacle, and there has to be the fall of a great man from a great height. And I'm very clear in my memory. I remember in my master's, a professor of mine taught me, and when we were discussing that, why do you exactly need a very great, a person of high rank and status? The all of Elizabethan literature, for that matter, is a case, can be a case in example, and Shakespeare, so to say, and the entire oeuvre of his playwriting, mostly, with an exception of Othello, I believe, as far as my memory goes, you see that most of them are high-ranking people. And why do you need that kind of rank and stature? And then the only answer that my professor then gave me was that, there needs to be some sound created when someone falls, in order for the listeners and the audience to realize, to feel the gravity of the fall. However, at the moment, it seemed some kind of explanation to me, but as I graduated as a scholar and as I progressed in my career and in research, I realized that what about people who are ordinary? Me and you, we are not kings or queens or anything like that. But and also everyday existence for common people uh, is an exercise in tragedy. And tragedy does not have to, there is no background in human tragedy. If you look at the very, if you look at it from a very approachable point of view, and if you look at it from a very practical, I would say, practical point of view, there is no background to the tragedies that happen to us. You are not given much time. And, time again, I just must note, time again is an important aspect that you need to be very careful about when you talk of how uh, how the ideas are presented, because much lies in the lags of time that are there, how an author uses the element of time. There is an entire dialogue and discourse on this, but the time would not permit me, I believe, to go much into the details of these things. So, there is an entire step by step analysis that should bring us to some conclusion regarding how exactly Marxism would fail in this. Uh, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so
Yes, sir.
I've been directed to wind up the argument, so I'll just quickly come to the part wherein I'll not talk anymore about the cultural materialist, and I would just give a hint of why you should also consider other. See, the idea is very simple. Why I chose to speak about my selection of a particular theoretical framework was that you do not have to be part of that myth kitty, because at a particular time, and mostly in terms of certain authors, there are very prominent theoretical frameworks or theories which are usually applied to a particular author. You're talking about Arthur Miller, you tend to talk about American dream concept, you're bound to talk about, of course you will be talking about them, but that does not necessarily has to be your exclusive theoretical framework. That is what my point here is. And then you need to look at the contemporary scene and then look at what other theoretical frameworks could be more relevant for your research, right? So then the other choice, of course, was new historicism, which tries to locate a text in the history of its own creation. But then I chose cultural materialism because then again, situating a text within its own historical time frame, and then talking about what happened in the 1950s, what happened in the 1930s when the Wall Street crashed, how it affected Arthur Miller's own life and his and how he shaped as an artist. How would that make your research relevant to the contemporary time? Because that is a question that you would always face as researchers. We all have faced that. So try to bring in an element of contemporaneity, and for that you need to pick your theoretical frameworks very carefully. And cultural materialism gave me that space to situate a text within its own time frame, also giving me that space to discuss it and situate it within the present, within the time frame of the present, the era that we live in. And also not just uh, only situated within its generic boundaries. I went on to discuss Miller within the context of both economics and sociology. Talking about the um, depression era, I started talking about economics and took a detailed analysis of what exactly failed American capitalism, rather than just sticking to a very redundant idea of capitalist culture, the fall of capitalism in America. We are all very well aware of that. What you can add to your research is something that is more relevant, right? And in the end, I would just like to say that while you are mindful of these things, please be mindful of three important things. Something that my teacher taught to me, um, Madam Nandini ma'am taught me that you have to be careful about three things when you look at your research and your research topic and your author. Be very careful about the history of the text, the historicity of the text, and the historiography of the text. And the I think since I do not have time, I will not dwell much upon, I may seek the permission of the chair if I have time to dwell upon history, historicity, and historiography, or maybe the researchers can find for themselves. My only advice would be they have to be careful. And when you look at the nuances of these three terms, much of your research will be easy, and you will have some real substance to add to um, the academia through your research.
Sagar, could you please elaborate a bit on these three concepts?
Of course, with pleasure, ma'am.
Uh,
So you see, and I'll keep it very simple and quick. See, history basically is an,
Actually,
yes, yes, ma'am.
yes, actually, we would like to take the questions.
Yes.
Those who have questions, they can send us on the emails, which is mentioned in the flyer, so that we can send it to our speakers. That would be very great, ma'am.
Sure.
Thank you, Nidhi, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you to the audience for understanding the time constraints. You're always welcome to engage in a dialogue over, email.
Yes,
So I'll quickly come to explain these three concepts very, very briefly. So see, history basically is an account of the events that have happened in the past. Simple as that. And historicity is the historical actuality of persons and events, meaning the quality of being part of history instead of being a historical myth, legend, or fiction. The historicity of a claim about the past is its factual status. Historicity denotes historical actuality, authenticity, factuality, and focuses on the true value of knowledge uh, that is claimed about the past. So you need to be very careful because you often tend to situate a text in its own history. So you have to be also very careful. For example, a quick example of Arthur Miller, when we talk about the Wall Street crash of the 1920, the Great Depression, and we, situate that text, All My Sons, and put the blame on the 1929 Wall Street crash. You need to be very careful about what exactly happened in the Wall Street crash. Why did the banks crash? You need to know about the economics of the Great Depression, so to say. And then about historiography. Historiography is the study of the methods used by historians in developing history as an academic discipline. And by extension, the term historiography is any body of historical work on a particular subject. The historiography of a specific topic covers how historians have studied that topic by using particular sources, techniques of research, and theoretical approaches to the interpretation of documentary sources. This that I gave you was actually a Wikipedia definition of what historiography is, but I'll tell you what historiography actually is. It is also the personal politics of the historian that shapes or that gets in the way or maybe facilitates the making of history. And you have to be very careful about these things. I think that would conclude my discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Hello,
much.
hello, hello.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes,
Hi, Sagar. Hi, this is Huma.
yes,
Thank you for the wonderful lecture. I had a small doubt.
yes,
When we talk about new historicism and old historicism, we'll take them as parts of historicity, or they will be like studied apart.
uh,
They will be studied differently because you said that historicity means actuality of facts, right?
yes.
So when we consider these two terms, they'll
Hmm.
be studied as parts of historicity or like differently from the
Uh,
both.
Hello. Sorry for the interruption. Actually, we have already said sorry for the paucity of
Shiva, maybe
time.
I can take your question on the email. I can write it to you.
Yes,
Just
Uh,
that would
yeah,
be
drop me
maybe.
very
an
great.
email.
Yeah, maybe
Right.
that would be a better. That would be a
Yes,
better
yes,
alternative. Thank you
Yes,
so much. Thank you.
why
thank
to rush to a quick generalization when we can have a
Okay.
discourse?
thank you. Thank you,
Perfect.
Huma Datta, and thank you, sir.
An excellent question. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the wonderful moderation, Dr. Paramita.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And now I request Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, for your valuable remarks. Hello, ma'am. You are not audible. I think there is some network problem. So, hello.
Yes, yes, Paramita.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
I managed to join back.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay, I could hear half of the lecture of Dr. Sagar Sharma. So maybe we can just proceed to the next lecture and then I will give my comments at the end of all three of them.
Okay, sure,
Right?
ma'am.
I was present for half of the lecture, then the other half I lost internet.
Oh, okay. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. As I already said, today, ma'am has a problem with the network, so we can understand, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Um, now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Nitika Gulati. Ms. Nitika Gulati is an assistant professor of Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College under University of Delhi, and she has been a senior research fellow at the University of Delhi and is currently pursuing her doctoral research on literary narratives of mental illness from India. She has completed her bachelor's and master's in English from Lady Sri Ram College. She frequently presents at national and international conferences and has 15 publications to her credit. Now, without any delay, I would request Ms. Nitika Gulati for her very knowledgeable speech. Ms. Nitika Gulati.
Yeah. A very good evening, everyone. Thank you, Parmita ma'am, for your kind words. And I'm grateful to Hindi University for giving me this opportunity to be present here. And I'm forever indebted to Professor Nandini Sahu, who has been my guiding light and a pillar of unwavering support and encouragement. And I would also like to share the share a PPT if you allow me to.
Yes, ma'am, you can share it. I think it is there. The option is already open.
All right.
Yes, ma'am.
I hope, is it visible?
Yes, it is
Yeah.
visible,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Thank you. Yeah. So thank you, Sagar, for your insights into the theory and praxis of the methodologies of research. And today I want to talk about something we often think of as technical and even boring, which is citation. And most discussions on citation styles, including MLA, often focus on technical correctness, that is, punctuation, placement, and consistency. But in the context of world literature or comparative literature, citation is far more than a formatting rule. As Sagar said, all writing is political. And I would like to take it from there to say that even our citations are political. So, citation is not just about where to put the comma or whether you italicize a title. It's actually about who you listen to, whose voices you amplify, and how you position yourself in scholarly conversations. So, this is particularly significant in comparative world literature research, where multiple traditions, languages, and epistemologies intersect. So, today I'm going to explore three things. One, citation as intellectual positioning. Second, ethical dimensions of referencing in multilingual and global contexts. And third, how we can use MLA to better represent diverse literary traditions. Now, starting with the first one, citation as intellectual positioning. World literature research is inherently comparative and transnational. It involves engaging with texts across linguistic and cultural boundaries. In comparative world literature, citation is not just, about avoiding plagiarism or providing sources. It becomes a statement about what traditions you are entering into conversation with, what voices you value, and how you structure knowledge. This is what we mean by citation as intellectual positioning. So, who we cite is who we are. Think of your bibliography as a family tree of ideas. Who you cite tells the reader what kind of a thinker that you are. For example, if you are writing about post-colonial literature and you only cite Edward Said and Homi Bhabha, it shows you're aligned with major post-colonial theorists. But if you also cite Gugi Wa Thiong'o or African and Asian critics writing in regional languages, you're making space for non-Western thought traditions as well. It's like curating a guest list for a dinner conversation. Who do you invite to speak? Next, citation is also a means of centering or decentering power. It can either reinforce dominant voices or bring marginalized thinkers to the forefront. For example, if you're working on Dalit literature in India, and if all your citations are from US or UK journals, you are unintentionally silencing local voices. So instead, cite Tamil or Marathi Dalit critics or include translations from oral testimonies. That small decision changes the power dynamic. So your bibliography can either be a colonizer's bookshelf or a collective archive. Third, citation is also a way of framing dialogue. So comparative world literature is built on dialogue between texts and cultures. And citation enables that conversation. It frames how the texts speak with each other. For example, if you're comparing Toni Morrison and Mahasweta Devi, your citations decide the axis of comparison. For example, if you're citing Spivak, that may focus on subalternity. If you're citing Hortense Spiller, she might foreground Black feminist thought. And if you're citing regional Indian feminist critics, they might bring caste and land politics into play. So it's not just what you compare, but how you compare that matters in comparative world literature. Your citations determine how that dialogue is framed. Next, citation is also a way of inclusion and recovery. So, who gets cited is also a question of visibility and inclusion. Often, texts and scholars writing in less globally dominant languages are undercited, even if their contributions are significant. So, citing lesser known or under translated works can function as an act of academic solidarity or intellectual recovery. For example, you're writing on Urdu short stories. So, including a little known critic from Lahore or a 1980s commentary in Urdu, even as a paraphrase, can function as intellectual recovery. You're not just quoting, do not just see it as quoting. You are literally rescuing voices from obscurity. So, you need to understand that citation is never neutral. In comparative world literature, citation is, it constructs scholarly authority, it reveals power relations, and marks your entry into particular critical communities. So by being mindful of who and what we cite, we can reposition ourselves within the global knowledge systems, we can resist homogenized canons, and we can promote a more polyphonic, pluralistic literary discourse. Next, I move on to the second part of my presentation, which is about ethics in multilingual referencing. So, first of all, it is about visibility and voice. In Global South scholarship, dominant citation practices often privilege scholarship that is written in English or published by Euro-American institutions. And many brilliant works are therefore undercited simply because they are not in English or not available on major platforms such as JSTOR. So what happens because of this? This results in erasure of local scholarship, which is written in regional or indigenous languages. It also leads to marginalization of oral, communal, or non-academic knowledge systems that might not follow conventional publication norms. And it also leads to a reductionist representation of cultures through the lens of the approved Anglophone theorists. Right? So what can be an ethical practice that you can follow? Make conscious efforts to include regional critics, untranslated sources wherever possible, and alternative knowledge producers such as activists, community historians, oral storytellers, right? For example, if you're writing on Tamil Dalit poetry, ethical referencing there means citing Tamil language scholarship wherever possible, even if it's in translation, even if it's in paraphrase. So citation should reflect effort and not just convenience, which a lot of time we tend to do, right? Next, it is important to also acknowledge translators, which is an important ethical practice. The translation, as we said, translation like writing or citation is also not a neutral act. It is an interpretation. Yet, translators are often invisible in citation practices despite being the co-creators of meaning in multilingual scholarship. So in MLA styles, translators must be, and anywhere, but since the focus of today is MLA, in MLA style, translators must be clearly acknowledged, not just in the work cited, but often within the main text. And when we are, providing in-text citations in MLA, we often just write the name of the author, right? So it is also important to include the name of the translator because the translator is also a co-creator. In world literature, texts are not fixed and they often exist in multiple translated versions, and each translation is an interpretation. So when we cite a translated work, we are not citing the original, we are citing someone's version of it. Citing just the author hides the translator's choices and erases the translator's role. But translators are important because they make interpretive decisions about tone, meaning, politics, and even gender. Sometimes they change the work significantly. So that might be the reason, and translators might be the reason we understand a text the way we do. Right? For example, in MLA, we might have a translation like this of War and Peace, which was translated by Richard Pivia and Larissa Volkonzi. So we see this is a usual citation, and this is the citation norm that we follow. However, we might not realize that this citation flattens what those translators actually did. So I'll tell you what they did. These two translators, they kept a lot of French in the original, which showed class distinctions, and other translators removed the French for easier readability. So citing War and Peace without noting these choices gives a false sense of neutrality, as if all versions say the same thing. Similarly, if we consider Gitanjali by Rabindranath Tagore, Tagore translated his own Bengali poems into English, but he didn't do a literal translation. He rewrote and reshaped the poems. He removed local cultural references. He made the tone more spiritual and Western friendly for a global audience. So when we just cite Tagore, Rabindranath, Gitanjali, Macmillan, 1913, it hides the fact, that this is not the same as Bengali. It's a new adapted version. And we are reading Tagore as a translator of himself, right? So citations oftentimes can hide a lot of things, which it must not. So our key takeaway is that every translation is a reading and every citation is a decision. So an ethical practice should be to cite the original author as well as the translator, discuss the translator's interpretive choices, especially where translation affects meaning. And if the work exists in multiple translations, clarify which version you are using and why. Next, another ethical practice that we can consider is to differentiate between the original as well as the translation. So ethical questions arise about whether to cite the original language edition or a translated edition. And this is the concern that we usually come across when we are creating our bibliography. So, and this comes up especially when you read the translation but quote or paraphrase from the original. And what can it lead to? It can misrepresent your source and can create a false impression of fluency or engagement. It might give the impression that you have read the original while you have not. Referencing only the English translation may also flatten cultural nuances or reinforce linguistic imperialism. So, if you're relying on a translation, don't pretend that you've read the original. An ethical practice would be to be transparent about what version you are using, and if you are right, if you're relying on the translation, cite the translated versions, and if possible, cite both of them. Right, so it's fine to only cite the translation, but it is important to be honest about what you have accessed. The next concern, ethical concern, is to cite oral or community knowledge. So not all knowledge is written or published. We know that, in multilingual or indigenous contexts, research often draws on oral sources, interviews, testimonies, folk tales, community knowledge, which may not be documented in traditional scholarly format. So some of the ethical practices that we can follow is to attribute oral sources carefully with the speaker's name, context, informed consent wherever applicable. And MLA 9 actually supports flexible citation for such cases, such as interviews, live performances, conversations. But the key is ethical sensitivity. So, and cite with respect to local protocols as well. For example, some communities have collective knowledge practices that challenge the idea of single authorship. For example, in indigenous Australian research, citing a Dreamtime story may require acknowledging the specific clan or custodians of that story and not just, anonymous. A lot of times when you don't know the source, or if there's not a single authorship, we just say anonymous. So, if a tribal elder has shared a folktale with you, cite it like this. Say the story as narrated by Shanta Devi, interviewed March 2023, Lohardaka. Right? So give the context. Next, language politics is also important. So referencing only dominant languages, that is English, French, German, reproduces epistemic injustice, often sidelining knowledge produced in minor or marginalized languages. So ethical practices including multilingual citations wherever possible, engaging with glossaries, footnotes, transliterations to open up linguistic diversity for readers, and resisting the assumption that only works available in English are academically valid or usable. So even if you are only paraphrasing, citing a Hindi literary critic in your English essay shows that you are recognizing multilingual intellectual work. Next, citation also is a form of accountability. Don't extract knowledge from another culture just to validate your argument. Citation is also about being accountable to your sources, especially when you are interpreting literature from a language or tradition that is not your own. So misinterpreting or misattributing can distort the meaning of research, reinforce stereotypes, cause harm. Avoid extractive research practices. Don't mime non-Western sources just to validate Western theory. So some ethical practices include building long-term engagements with the traditions that you are citing. Wherever possible, cite scholars and critics from within the linguistic or cultural community, and be transparent about limitations in access or language proficiency. For example, if you are writing on a Khasi folktale and you have never engaged with Khasi scholars, be cautious. Cite them, acknowledge your limits. Citation is not just about what you know, it's about how responsibly you engage. And now I come to the last part of my presentation, which is MLA and the challenge of global literature. So MLA, as one of the most widely used citation style in literary studies, has adapted to global research needs, but we must also need to realize that it has challenges, it has limitations. And one possible adaptation is integrating indigenous citation frameworks within MLA, much like anthropologists incorporate oral histories alongside written texts. So, with the globalization of literary studies, we'll see that MLA is a helpful it's a helpful tool for structuring, but we need to realize that it is made for Anglophone academic contexts. It assumes linear authorship. It assumes formal publication. It It also necessitates clear titles and page numbers, and these three things don't always work for oral stories, folk tests, translated versions. Linear authorship, it's a concept based on the idea that there is only a single identifiable author creating the work, and the work was completed at a particular point of time, and the text follows a clear traceable line of ownership from author to reader, and which is not the case in many of the oral stories, folk tales, translated versions, community works, right? So we need to challenge this assumption, right? In many non-Western indigenous or oral traditions, authorship is actually non-linear, collective, or evolving, right? For example, a folk tale which is told by different storytellers across generations, there's no one original author. Similarly, a sacred song which is composed collectively by a community where the authorship is shared and maybe anonymous. And even oral histories are shaped through conversations, memory, and performance, not through fixed texts. Right? So citation styles like MLA are actually based on linear authorship models, but we need to look at it critically. And there is, MLA 9 does provide us a flexible template, right? But it doesn't always guide us on how to cite works in scripts other than Latin or those with no formal publisher, right? So however, MLA 9 uses a template of core elements, and you can adjust format for non-traditional sources. For example, you can cite an interview like this, or you can cite a translation like the one given on the screen. So MLA can adapt, but it is on us to make thoughtful choices. Also, we must remember that the epistemic framework, who counts as the author, what counts as a source, it is still shaped by Western ideas of knowledge. Lastly, uh, MLA and ethical citation together lead to better scholarship. So it is important. Some of the practices that you can use is to use footnotes for cultural nuances, crediting all contributors, translators, narrators, editors. And MLA should be seen as a tool. It's an important tool, but it is on us to make its use ethical. How we use it defines our scholarship. And I think Dikshya in her talk is going to take you deeper into the nitty-gritties of MLA citation. So lastly, just to sum up, what can we do as researchers? We can use MLA with awareness, we can embrace linguistic diversity, we can cite across linguistic political boundaries, and we can respect oral and collective authorship. Citation should be seen as a way of world making. It is a scholarly worldview. It is never neutral. It reflects who we are, what we value, and how we see the world. So when we cite with care, we include rather than exclude, we amplify rather than erase, and we build bridges instead of walls. So in world literature, citation becomes a form of ethical world making, which is a chance to make the literary world a more plural, just, and inclusive place to be. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for this fascinating presentation and lecture. Now, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Dikshya Samantarai, who is currently an assistant professor in the Department of English at Physics Valla. Ms. Samantarai is a doctoral research scholar in the Department of English in the School of Humanities at IGNOU. She has taught as a guest faculty of English at Miranda House, University of Delhi. So without any delay, I request Ms. Dikshya Samantarai for a very valuable speech. Ms. Dikshya Samantarai.
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Thank you so much for the
But
lovely
your
introduction.
video,
Yeah, I am unable to connect the camera for some reason. Actually, there's some Wi-Fi issue and electricity issue at my end. So I'm trying to refresh it once. I'm going to just leave the meeting and join it again and try if it works. Otherwise, I'll just share the PPT and go ahead with the presentation anyway. Just give me a minute to try and reconnect.
okay, ma'am.
Yeah, I tried, it did not work. So
Okay, no problem, ma'am. No issue. I
I
think we can continue now. Yes.
yeah, because of the time constraint as well, I don't want to waste anyone's time. So thank you so much, Paramita ma'am, for the lovely introduction, and I hope that the PPT is visible. And I am extremely
It's visible.
privileged to be sharing this space with my co-scholars. And I would first like to thank uh, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Professor Nandini Sahu, for giving me this opportunity and considering me for this talk. And and I thank Hindi University as well for this wonderful, wonderful opportunity and providing me with this stage to share my thoughts. And obviously, this lecture series has been an incredible contribution to the world of research and for upcoming research scholars, students, everyone. And as usual, uh, Honorable Vice Chancellor has continuously strived to contribute every single day to the discourse, to the collective discourse. So we are all here to share knowledge, and that's what we will do. So Dr. Sagar's insights on theory and praxis in comparative literature. The starting point, I think we are going very chronologically and systematically. So he gave us and he gave the students the theoretical needs. He addressed their theoretical concerns, and then we finally heard Nitika ma'am, and she presented on MLA citation and the critical aspect of it. Now I am finally, I think, left with talking about the technical part, and this is again going to be a little bit boring, but I have tried. I'm going to try my best to address, make it as interesting as possible. It's very difficult to, but I'll still try. And I'll just like to mention here that I think Nandini ma'am gives me too much of credit for my technical expertise. I'm not that big of an expert when it comes to citation, but because she thinks that I am, I would just like to do justice to that uh, thought. I will try my best to provide as much information as I can. And Nitika ma'am has already addressed the issues that are present in comparative literature and while using citation, and what are the ethical guidelines you should be following. And जो modern language citation, is it okay if I switch between Hindi and English, or should I just stick to English? I'm not really sure. Uh, Paramita ma'am, if you can
Ma'am, it
just
is, yeah, it will be very
yeah,
helpful if you use both the languages.
yeah, so I can do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So because मैं physics वाला से जुड़ी हुई हूँ, and because I use both the languages, I'm comfortable in English, and because हम लोग comparative literature के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं, so I think both the languages are going to be it's the right way to go about it. So starting with the topic, I think what I am going to say is just the technical part. It's in continuation to Nitika ma'am's lecture, and she has already very beautifully talked about the nuances, जो problems हैं citation में, and जो हम लोग कई बार ना ओवरलुक कर देते हैं. Citation जो है ना वो लास्ट मिनट में सबके सर पे पड़ता है, and उससे क्या होता है ना, प्रॉब्लम होती है. आप लोगों को कई लोगों को citation के बारे में कोई जानकारी नहीं होती है, and you usually struggle with this particular aspect of writing a research paper. So theory is the first part. First step in writing a research paper is theory. आप select करोगे topic, आप select करोगे अपने texts, आपने लिख लिया content, सब कुछ हो गया. फिर आप लोग obviously ethical practices जो बताई गई हैं उसको follow करोगे. And the last step जो सबसे critical भी है and काफी बार ignored भी होता है, वो है citation part. And अगर हम citations की बात करें English literature के field में या और comparative literature के field में, and because this is Hindi University, so comparative literature is more important. It's very, very important to know the basics of citations. And MLA जो citation है, वो है Modern Language Association का citation. This is basically a set of guidelines जो कि Modern Language Organization के द्वारा दी गई हैं. And ये सारे जितने आपके thesis हो गए, लिटरेचर ह्यूमैनिटीज डिसिप्लिन में काफी सारे थीसिस एमएलए स्टाइल ही फॉलो करते हैं, एंड जो आपके रिसर्च पेपर्स होती है वो भी एमएलए स्टाइल ही फॉलो करती हैं, एंड स्पेशली एज आई सेड ह्यूमैनिटीज एंड कंपैरेटिव लिटरेचर के लिए भी दिस इज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट suitable forms of using citations. And जब आप sources use करते हैं ना, आप कई बार कई जगहों से चीजें लेते हैं, एंड ये मैंने नंदिनी मैम से ही सीखा है, उनकी स्टूडेंट रही हूँ मैं, सो उनके पाथ पे फॉलो करने का आदत है। एंड शी हैज टॉट अस कि जब भी आप कोई भी सोर्स यूज करें, हमेशा एक स्टिकी नोट यूज करें या फ्लैश कार्ड्स यूज करें, टू टेक नोटेशंस ऑफ व्हाट आर द सोर्सेज यू आर यूजिंग, क्योंकि यू लूज सोर्सेज, आप कई बार भूल जाते हो आप कौन से सोर्सेज यूज कर रहे हो। एंड अगर कंपेरेटिव लिटरेचर के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में मैं बात करूं तो आप लोग ट्रांसलेशंस यूज करेंगे, आप रीजनल लिटरेचर्स के काम यूज करेंगे, एंड ऑफन इट्स बाइलिंगुअल। Like comparative literature is a lot of times bilingual, not always, but a lot of the times it's bilingual. And so इसमें जो key elements है MLA style में, and this is applicable across all disciplines, humanities में, not just comparative literature, but all the other disciplines. In text citations, जो आप text के बीच अंदर जो आप paraphrase करके use करते हैं, या आप किसी भी तरीके से कोई भी ऑथर को कोट करते हैं, तो इन टेक्स्ट साइटेशन देना जरूरी है। हम पूरा पूरा रिसर्च पेपर लिख के वी फॉरगेट, that who we have paraphrased, what have we done, हम सिर्फ किताब मेंशन करके छोड़ देते हैं या सिर्फ एक नाम मेंशन करके छोड़ देते हैं, नहीं, इट हैज टू बी वेरी डिटेल्ड। उसके बारे में हम अभी थोड़ा सा विस्तार में बात करेंगे आगे जाके। देन देयर इज ऑफ कोर्स द वर्क साइटेड लिस्ट, which is a very very important part of your document. आगे का जो रिसर्च होगा, जो आपके काम पढ़ेंगे, वो इसी वर्क साइटेड लिस्ट को ही रेफर करके पढ़ेंगे। बी इट योर PhD सुपरवाइजर होंगे, आपके पोस्ट स्कॉलर्स होंगे, कोई स्टूडेंट है। सो दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। एंड ऑफ कोर्स फॉर्मेटिंग गाइडलाइंस, जो बेसिक चीजें होती है, मार्जिन, स्पेसिंग, पेज नंबर्स, इन चीजों में ना ये बहुत इजीली इग्नोर किया जाता है, तो एंड लास्ट मिनट होता है, तो इन चीजों का ध्यान रखना बहुत ज्यादा जरूरी है। And MLA 9th edition is obviously the latest version where certain changes have been there, language को लेके कुछ editions की गई हैं, and हम लोग जैसे 7th 8th 9th सारे editions follow करते हैं। and ये consistency जो होती है, citation जो होता है ना, वो आपके काम को एक तरीके से मान्यता देता है in terms of credibility and in terms of the academic stature जो है। अगर आपका formatting हिला हुआ है, then no journal will accept your paper for publication. Your thesis is going to be rejected on the basis of bibliography, on the basis of citation. And I was really afraid when I was submitting my thesis that ma'am बहुत strict है इस चीज को लेके, and कुछ भी इधर उधर थोड़ा सा हो गया तो thesis will not go forward. So this is very very important. And as I said कि बहुत ज्यादा ignored भी है, and बहुत ज्यादा बहुत लोगों को पता नहीं रहता है कि कैसे करना है। नाउ कंपैरेटिव लिटरेचर की जब हम बात करते हैं कि एक ही टेक्स्ट, मतलब हम इतने सारे सोर्सेज लेंगे, मल्टीपल कल्चर से सोर्सेज लेते हैं, एंड दिस इज समथिंग दैट ऑलरेडी नितिका मैम has addressed for you, that how you are supposed to take and quote from people from all the other all kinds of culture and world literature. Comparative literature is basically world literature. अगर हम इंडिया के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में भी अगर बात करते हैं, so different periods, different translations, different versions of the text, incomplete information हमारे पास होती है, but we have to still standardized form में उसको हमें mention करना है। so that अगर आप foreign language कोई भी use कर रहे हो, मान लो आपने कोई French literature का text cite किया है, कोई Persian literature का text cite किया है, उनको track करना बहुत मुश्किल होता है। तो इसीलिए आपको कंपैरेटिव लिटरेचर में एक्सेसिबिलिटी मेंटेन करने के लिए अच्छे से साइटेशन का ध्यान रखना बहुत ज्यादा जरूरी है। एंड एज आई हैव गिवन सम एग्जांपल्स हियर, दैट मान लो आप एक 16th सेंचुरी स्पेनिश प्ले यू आर कंपेयरिंग विद द 21st सेंचुरी कोरियन नॉवल, एंड कंपैरेटिव लिटरेचर का यही एक बहुत खास बात है, इट्स अ वेरी ब्यूटीफुल एंड अ वेरी यूनिक एस्पेक्ट ऑफ कंपैरेटिव लिटरेचर, दैट यू कैन compare anything and everything that is there to be compared in the world, as long as आप उस चीज को justify करते हो, right? And this thing keeps the documentation in a very very sorted manner. And मान लो अगर आप 21st century work written in English with a classical Indian text जो कि संस्कृत में लिखी होती है, तो उसको अगर आप citation कर रहे हो, so tracing becomes very easy. Then in text citations का जो core pattern रहता है MLA में, this is what it looks like. It's very similar to your APA, American Psychological Association भी APA is also used in certain कुछ papers आपको APA format में भी मांगते हैं, because time constraint है तो हम APA को cover नहीं कर पाएंगे आज, सिर्फ MLA कर सकते हैं, but MLA is definitely more common. And ये जो in text citation है वो दोनों में same ही रहता है। Author page, author का last name and the page has to be mentioned, no comma, nothing. एंड अगर देर इज नो ऑथर, मान लीजिए आपके पास ऑथर का नाम नहीं है, आपके पास सिर्फ टाइटल है किताब का, तो आप सिर्फ उस टाइटल को थोड़ा सा शॉर्ट करके, मान लीजिए इसका पूरा टाइटल है कंपैरेटिव ट्रेंड्स इन वर्ल्ड लिटरेचर, so you can just use the first two words and give the page number. It's very very important to give the page number because that will be very exact कि आपने इसी पेज नंबर से मान लीजिए कोटेशन लिखा है। एंड मान लीजिए अगर आपने पूरा टेक्स्ट को ही साइटेशन किया है, देन इन टेक्स्ट साइटेशंस में सिर्फ नाम भी लिखने से चलता है, वेर यू कैन इग्नोर द पेज नंबर इन सर्टेन केसेस, नॉट ऑल केसेस। 3 और मोर ऑथर्स है तो आप एट ऑल यूज कर सकते हैं। पंक्चुएशन जो है that follows the bracket, ब्रैकेट के पैरेंथेसिस जो है उसका मतलब है ब्रैकेट्स, ब्रैकेट के बाद फुल स्टॉप आता है। ये बहुत ज्यादा टेक्निकल इन्फॉर्मेशन है बट बहुत क्रूशियल है, मैं ये बार बार इसीलिए बोल रही हूँ बिकॉज ये दिस इज वेरी इट्स लाइक लिंग्विस्टिक्स, it's very technical, it's very scientific, but unfortunately or fortunately whatever, we have to follow this pattern, otherwise we cannot go anywhere as researchers. सो अगर हम ट्रांसलेशन की बात करें, ऑलरेडी नितिका मैम ये चीज एड्रेस कर चुके हैं, थोड़ा सा रिपीट लग सकता है किसी किसी को, बट जब आप ट्रांसलेशन यूज करते हैं इन टेक्स्ट साइटेशन में भी ओरिजिनल ऑथर जो है, नॉट द ट्रांसलेशन वन, उनको आपको मेंशन करना है। फिर आप साइड में ऐसे ट्रांसलेटेड एमिली विल्सन, TRANS शॉर्ट फॉर्म में आप उसको मेंशन करिए। एंड ट्रांसलेशन में एज ऑलरेडी मेंशन, आपको ऑलरेडी ये चीज इंफॉर्मेशन मिल चुकी है, that you have to mention the original author, then followed by the translator, क्योंकि ट्रांसलेटर का रोल बहुत ज्यादा महत्वपूर्ण है when it comes to comparative literature and world literature. Without the translator, the text is not accessible to us. Not all of us know all the languages. So comparative literature में हम translations पे बहुत ज्यादा rely भी करते हैं। एंड सो मान लीजिए आप एक तरीके से विल्सन रेंडर्स ओडिसियस अ कॉम्प्लिकेटेड मैन, सो आपने ट्रांसलेटर का मान ऐसे भी आप एक सेंटेंस में भी उनको मेंशन कर सकते हैं। एंड आप एडिशन, ट्रांसलेशन, हमेशा वर्डिंग, स्पेलिंग, ये सारी चीजों का आपको ध्यान रखना पड़ता है। देन अगर हम पोइट्री, ड्रामा और दूसरे मल्टीलिंगुअल टेक्स्ट की बात करें, सो लाइन नंबर्स यहाँ पे मेंशन करना है। प्रोज हो गया तो पेज नंबर, पोइट्री हो गया तो लाइन नंबर्स। अगर एक लाइन ही मेंशन किया है आपने तो एक, इफ इट्स अ रेंज देन यू हैव टू मेंशन इट इन द रेंज दैट आई हैव ऑलरेडी शोन यू। ड्रामा में एक्ट, सीन, लाइन रहता है, जैसे आर्थर मिलर के प्लेस के बारे में डॉक्टर सागर वाज डिस्कसिंग, सो मान लीजिए आप उसको यूज कर रहे हैं, एंड देन दिस इज द फॉर्मेट दैट यू आर सपोज टू फॉलो। एंड प्रोज, ऑथर और पेज, बट एज आई सेड कि ओरिजिनल या ट्रांसलिटरेशन। सो ट्रांसलिटरेशन का मतलब क्या है, जैसे हम हिंदी में बात कर रहे हैं बट आप इंग्लिश में टाइप कर रहे हैं, राइट? सो टाइपिंग इन अदर लैंग्वेज इन योर लैंग्वेज और इन एनी अदर लैंग्वेज इज नोन एज ट्रांसलिटरेशन। ये ट्रांसलेशन स्टडीज में हम पढ़ते हैं इस चीज को। सो जैसे हम व्हाट्सएप करते हैं, बहुत लोग हिंदी इंग्लिश में टाइप करते हैं, है ना? सो उसको ट्रांसलिटरेशन कहते हैं। सो ट्रांसलिटरेट करके भी आप ओरिजिनल चीज को अपने लैंग्वेज में, मान लीजिए आप इंग्लिश में पूरा आपका रिसर्च पेपर है और हिंदी में टेक्स्ट है, तो आप ट्रांसलिटरेशन यूज कर सकते हैं इस केस में। एंड प्रिसाइजली आप डिविजन जब करोगे, सो इट अपीयर्स, बिकॉज अगर बहुत सारे फॉर्मेट्स हैं, बहुत सारे लैंग्वेजेस हैं, बहुत सारे एडिशंस हैं, फॉर एग्जाम्पल शेक्सपियर हो गए, फॉर एग्जाम्पल रशियन ऑथर्स हो गए, उनके मल्टीपल ट्रांसलेशन एग्जिस्ट करते हैं। सो यू हैव टू स्पेसिफाई द ईयर एंड द डेट वेरेवर इट्स नेसेसरी। एंड जब वर्क साइटेड पेज की मैं बात करूं, विच इज ऑल्सो कॉल्ड एज द बिब्लियोग्राफी, राइट? सो वहां पे यू हैव टू अल्फाबेटाइज बाय ऑथर, ठीक है? ऑथर के हिसाब से अल्फाबेटिकली रहता है ऑथर, टाइटल ऑफ द सोर्स, टाइटल ऑफ कंटेनर। कंटेनर मीन्स क्या आपने जर्नल यूज किया है, कोई जर्नल का नाम रहेगा उसमें। अगर आपने एंथोलॉजी विच इज अ कलेक्शन ऑफ पोइट्री हो गया या कलेक्शन ऑफ सम अदर एसेज हो गया तो उसको कहते हैं। वेबसाइट हो गया। सो कंटेनर इज अ अम्ब्रेला टर्म, उसमें सारी चीजें आ जाती हैं। या तो कोई डेटाबेस आपने यूज किया, जैसे JSTOR इज अ ह्यूज डेटाबेस दैट अ लॉट ऑफ पीपल यूज, तो उसको कंटेनर कहते हैं। एंड डबल स्पेसिंग मेंटेन करना होता है MLA में, पूरे डॉक्यूमेंट में, सिर्फ वर्क साइटेड नहीं, पूरे डॉक्यूमेंट में डबल स्पेसिंग रहता है। अगर ये वर्ड होता तो मैं आपको डबल स्पेसिंग भी शायद डिस्प्ले करके दिखा देती, बट डबल स्पेसिंग इज बेसिकली 1.5 to 2.0 स्पेसिंग रहता है। हैंगिंग इंटेंड रहता है, जो बेसिकली इट्स लाइक टैब, आप 2 बार दबाओगे, एक बार दबाओगे तो 0.5 इंचेस वो सेट हो जाता है। दीज आर ऑल वेरी टेक्निकल things. I wish I could have shown you, videos of how to do it. But as I said, time constraint hai, so these things you can also go and look up at YouTube at your own convenience. So दिस इज द बेसिक फॉर्मेट. वो MLA 7th 8th 9th में मोर और लेस सेम ही रहता है. जैसे लोकेशन वगैरह है वो 9th में इतना ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं है, 7th तक इंपॉर्टेंट हुआ करता था. ऐसे छोटे मोटे इश्यूज और चेंजेस आते रहते हैं, वो आप अपने डिमांड के हिसाब से आप उसको चेंज कर सकते हैं. ना अगर हम बुक्स की बात करें, सो सिंगल ऑथर अगर है तो इट हैज टू बी यूगी वॉ त्योंगो, विजिट ऑफ द क्रो, पैंथियन, 2006. तो यहाँ पे आप देख सकते हो पंक्चुएशन इज वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. ऑथर, फिर फुल स्टॉप आया, फिर नाम आया, फिर फुल स्टॉप आया, फिर पैंथियन आया, फिर कॉमा आया, फिर जाके 2006 आया. अच्छा, हियर आई हैव मिस्ड द आइटलाइजेशन ऑफ द बुक्स. सो यहाँ पे आइटलिक्स में आपका बुक्स आएगा. सॉरी, आई एम मेकिंग इट राइट नाउ, सो थोड़ा सा मेरे पार्ट पे ओवरसाइट है, बट द बुक्स हैव टू बी बेसिकली आइटलिसाइज्ड. ठीक है, italicized whole books यहाँ पे जैसे मैंने mention किया है, but it should be italicized like this. So for example, if this is there, so this has to be in italics. Italicize whole books and end with a period. हमेशा full stop में ही, period is basically full stop, उसी से आपको खत्म करना होता है किताबें, right? Then अगर हम chapters और anthologies की बात करें, so अगर आप कोई particular chapter use कर रहे हैं तो उसको double quotation में आप वहाँ chapter का नाम डाल सकते हैं. And if you are at all using this particular, for example, this is the name of the book, it has to be in italics. Editor आपको mention करना है, publisher mention करना है, year and page number range में ऐसे आपको mention करना है. So these are the small things जो कई बार छूट जाते हैं. So these are, एक बार आप करोगे, this is like mathematics, this is like linguistics. Once you know the trick, once you know what it is, आपको you just need to practice it once or twice to get the hang of it. उसके बाद ये बहुत easy होता है, इतना कोई problematic नहीं होता है. And multi volume अगर है तो आपको volume 1, volume 2, volume 3 ये सारी चीजें भी देनी होती हैं. And anthologies are basically bread and butter for comparative literature scholarship, because anthologies basically जो translations होती हैं वो mostly anthology के form में बहुत ज्यादा publish होती हैं. So anthologies are like bread and butter. It's like it's like a Bible for comparative literature scholars, right? Then translated text, as I said, translated, again this has been mentioned. So translator को credit देना बहुत ज्यादा important है, क्योंकि कई बार क्या होता है, एक ही टेक्स्ट है, मान लो उसी को 4 लोगों ने ट्रांसलेट किया है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल कालिदास का शकुंतला है, उसके 2-3 ट्रांसलेशंस अवेलेबल हैं, एंड एवरी ट्रांसलेशन हैज समथिंग डिफरेंट. बिकॉज आप टेक्स्ट पढ़ोगे, आप ट्रांसलेशन पढ़ोगे, 4 ट्रांसलेशन है आपके सामने, चारों ट्रांसलेशन में इंटरप्रिटेशंस डिफर, क्योंकि वहां पे ट्रांसलेटर का खुद के कुछ व्यूज, खुद के इंटरप्रिटेशंस, क्योंकि आप एक लैंग्वेज से दूसरी लैंग्वेज में जब ट्रांसलेट करते हैं तो इश्यूज आती हैं. कोई वर्ड का क्या सिनोनिम होना चाहिए, व्हाट इज द राइट वर्ड, संस्कृत का जो एग्जैक्ट वर्ड आपको इंग्लिश में नहीं मिलता है. कई बार इंडियन वर्ड्स इतने सारे हैं जिनका इंग्लिश काउंटर पार्ट नहीं है, दैट इज व्हाई इंडियन इंग्लिश exists as a separate discipline and separate language now. So ये सारी चीजों का हमें ध्यान रखना पड़ता है. एंड MLA में translated by टाइटल के बाद आता है. So जैसे ये टाइटल है टेक्स्ट का, again this has to be in italics. इसके बाद आपका translated by the person आता है, and of course you have to mention the publisher and the date. डिजिटल सोर्सेज में सेम चीज आपको करना है. कोई भी अगर आप आर्काइव यूज कर रहे हैं, कोई भी आप आर्टिकल यूज कर रहे हैं, कुछ भी कर रहे हैं आप, अगर आप JSTOR पे भी आर्टिकल यूज करते हैं तो उसमें भी अगर जर्नल का ऑनलाइन लिंक है, सो यू हैव टू अटैच द URL, राइट? URL सबको शायद समझ आता है. आई एम अज्यूमिंग दैट माय ऑडियंस नोज व्हाट इज URL. सो URL का लिंक जरूर अटैच करें, सो दैट अगर किसी को उसको एक्सेस करना है तो वो कर सकते हैं. एंड अगर एक्सेस डेट अवेलेबल है, आपको याद है कि आपने कब उस चीज को, उस सोर्स को एक्सेस किया था, एग्जैक्ट डेट, देन यू कैन डेफिनेटली यूटिलाइज इट. देन MLA एरर्स में क्या होता है ना, कई बार APA वर्सेस MLA में कंफ्यूजन हो जाता है. जैसे मैं खुद भी हूँ, मुझे भी थोड़ा स्टम्बल करती हूँ मैं व्हेन इट कम्स टू APA वर्सेस MLA, थोड़े से ओवरलैपिंग है. एंड जैसे कोई ट्रांसलेटर भूल जाता है, कोई एडिटर भूल जाता है, कोई पेज रेंज देना भूल जाता है, एंड यही छोटे छोटे एरर्स आपको आगे जाके रिजेक्शन फेस करना पड़ता है जब आप जर्नल्स में अपना पेपर देते हो. कोई भी रेप्यूटेड जर्नल है वो बिब्लियोग्राफी फॉर्मेटिंग को बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंस देते हैं. So I request you all to please, be aware of these small things, as they will take you a long way. You will not face multiple rejections. देखो, कंटेंट पे रिजेक्ट होना, थियोरिटिकल बेसिस पे रिजेक्ट होना, वो आप चेंज कर सकते हो. बट ऐसे फॉर्मेटिंग पे रिजेक्ट होना, इट्स अ वेरी इट्स समथिंग दैट इज वेरी अवॉइडेबल, राइट. एंड जैसे पंक्चुएशन हो गया, पंक्चुएशन फुल स्टॉप जहां होना चाहिए वहां आपने कॉमा डाल दिया, या जहां कॉमा होना चाहिए वहां फुल स्टॉप डाल दिया. ये चीजें नहीं होनी चाहिए. एंड citing a secondary source as if you're at the primary. So प्राइमरी सोर्सेस पहले आएंगे, सेकेंडरी सोर्सेस बाद में आते हैं. अल्फाबेटिकली ही होता है वैसे मोस्टली. बट इफ यू वांट, आप कैटेगराइज अगर कर देते हो ना कि प्राइमरी सोर्सेज ये है और सेकेंडरी सोर्सेज ये है, वो आपके लिए एक अच्छा कैटेगराइजेशन रहता है. इट टेल्स योर रिव्यूअर दैट यू आर अवेयर कि आपका प्राइमरी सोर्स क्या है और सेकेंडरी सोर्स क्या है. एंड प्राइमरी सेकेंडरी का जो डिस्टिंक्शन है, इट अगेन गोज अ लॉन्ग वे in helping you get your research work published. And checklist, ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, और ये नंदिनी मैम भी बहुत बार हमें बोल चुकी हैं. हमेशा एक डॉक्यूमेंटेशन रखिए अपने पास कि आप कहाँ से क्या चीज ले रहे हैं. आप भूल सकते हैं, फिर क्या होगा कि आप मिस कर जाएंगे, वो प्लेजरिज्म में आ जाएगा. चेकलिस्ट बिल्ड करिए. थोड़े थोड़े से आपकी जो फॉर्मेटिंग अगर आपसे मिस हो जाता है, वो आपके मार्क्स, अगर आप रिसर्च पेपर सबमिट करें अपनी यूनिवर्सिटी में, उस पर आप मार्क्स खो दोगे. आपकी क्रेडिबिलिटी पे क्वेश्चन मार्क आ जाता है कि अरे इन्होंने तो प्लेजराइज किया है, दे हैव नॉट गिवन ड्यू क्रेडिट टू द ऑथर. कोई भी सवाल उठा सकता है. सो प्लीज बी वेरी वेरी केयरफुल अबाउट दीज थिंग्स. एंड लास्ट thing that I would like to tell you, this is I think going to be very helpful for all of you. So ये ना कुछ ऑनलाइन टूल्स हैं अवेलेबल, जहाँ पे आप citation generator कहते हैं इसको. This is my concluding slide. So are they a help or a hindrance? क्योंकि कई बार आप जैसे AI पे रिलाई करते हो तो गलतियां हो सकती हैं, right? So these are online tools. They are very helpful for last minute revisions. जैसे Zotero Bib, it's called zaybib.org. It's no account is needed. आप जैसे URL डाला, आपने फॉर्मेटिंग चूज किया, इट विल गिव यू द साइटेशन ऑटोमेटिकली. इजी बिब, साइटेशन मशीन, ये सारी चीजें एड्स के थ्रू हैं. आप उनसे भी साइटेशन, आप बुक्स का नाम डालो, आप जर्नल का नाम डालो, आप वेबसाइट का नाम डालो, वो आपको ना MLS 9th में, 8th में, 7th में, जो भी आप एडिशन चूज करोगे, आपको साइटेशन जेनरेट करके दे देंगे. गूगल डॉक्स में भी है एंड MS वर्ड में भी है. बट MS वर्ड में आप जरा केयरफुल रहिएगा, बिकॉज वहां पे अपडेटेड नहीं होता है. आपका कौन सा MS वर्ड का वर्जन है उस पर डिपेंड करता है. बट देखिए, ये चीज आपको ध्यान रखना है दैट जनरेटर्स डू सेव टाइम, लास्ट मिनट चीजें हैं, बट दे नेवर रिप्लेस व्हाट यू कैन कैच. ह्यूमन इंटरवेंशन जो है वो बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है. आप अगर जनरेटर यूज भी कर रहे हैं, उसको प्लीज दोबारा वेरीफाई करिएगा, ठीक है. दे शुड बी ट्रीटेड एज ड्राफ्ट्स, नॉट द फाइनल कॉपी. ओके, सो this is where I would stop my presentation, and because time constraint tha, to I thought that I should wrap it up. Any doubts, anything, as Paramita ma'am have already told you people, you can definitely mail, you can definitely bother us anytime you want to. Yeah, handing it over to ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for such an informative presentation. Now, I would request Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am for the valuable remarks. Professor Nandini Sahu ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Paramita. I will just quickly give a couple of comments because it's already too late and I missed half of the presentation of Sagar. But anyway, I was listening to all of them carefully, though my video is not working. And all the three presentations were absolutely well researched as expected from my students. They never fail to make me proud of them. Sagar talked about negotiations of hybridity and identity of the cross-cultural authors in comparative world literatures, and that was a very very pertinent and important point. And then again he focused on the problems of canon and the peripheral inclusions in the research of comparative world literature. And then somehow he hinted at translation as method and metaphor for cross-cultural authors, and then the reception and contextual shifts in cross-cultural research. And then he concluded with the ethics of representation and authorship in the cross-cultural authorship. And he gave very beautiful examples. Arthur Miller, something is one of the authors that he has worked on. And he gave references of many other writers and authors. And I'm sure that the recording is going to be helpful for all of us. I'm going to listen to the entire recording because I missed part of it. And then coming to Nitika, she is again a research scholar. She's a scholar worth her salt. She does very serious work, and she makes sure that when there is some research paper or publication, everything is taken care of, like citation and textual interpretations and everything. And she is a wonderful teacher, definitely, in Delhi University, and I'm so proud of her. So Nitika was talking about intellectual appropriation and cultural misrepresentation when it comes to comparative literature. Because of the diverse linguistic, cultural, and philosophical issues in comparative world literature. That's what I understood from her presentation. And then she hinted at the dialogic authenticity and the scholarly accountability of the researchers when they create a conversation between two different texts from two different cultures. And that was a very interesting point. I would recommend that my colleagues in Hindi University look into it carefully and then include this in their research. And because our translation studies department is doing excellent work. So when you look at texts from different cultures vis-a-vis translation, please take care of these points that Nitika pointed out. And then Nitika also hinted at the cross-cultural verification and methodological transparency. There should be transparency when it is comparative literature, and some kind of rigorous and interdisciplinary methods should go into the research. And then she also talked about MLA ninth edition and the detailing vis-a-vis MLA ninth edition. That was very important, Nitika. Thank you so much for doing this good work. I must congratulate you.
Thank you.
And when it comes, welcome. And when it comes to Diksha, she talked about citations in comparative world literature where multilingual and cross-cultural dimensions they complicate the standard practices. Diksha was very, very practical in her approach, bilingual, English and Hindi. So it's going to be helpful for Hindi University. Diksha, thank you so much. Then Diksha, again, the problems that she might have faced during her research with me, I have been very, very strict with my scholars. So she makes it a point to quote it every time. And then I am reminded that I should continue to be so. I cannot be lenient with the scholars. I have never been. And Diksha did very serious work, good work. And Diksha talked about the multilingual source attribution and the translation citations in comparative world literature. And then she pointed it to the consistency in citation style across varied textual traditions like different literary cultures, and then MLA and Chicago framework, and how the scholars must balance fidelity to the original translation with coherence in the adopted citation style. It's important, Diksha. It's a very good point. Our teachers and the students are going to be benefited by this. And then she concluded with remarks on the intertextual referencing across media and non-canonical texts. I am glad that you pointed at canon and then again the non-canonical texts in comparative literature, because comparative literature usually it engages with only important literary canons. But we have to break the boundaries of the canons when it comes to comparative literature. And then I think Nitika pointed out about the oral traditions and epics and performance texts and unpublished manuscripts, how it's difficult to create citations out of those. I think Nitika pointed out. And Diksha took it one step further. Both your lectures were somehow interconnected. It looked like you have discussed and presented, but it was actually not so. I know about it. So the three lectures had coherence, they had cohesion, and all three of you did good work, excellent work. We are going to share the YouTube with everybody very soon. I must congratulate all of you for making these well-researched presentations. And again, I am so sorry for the technical glitch today because of the power and the issues that I faced in the initial stage of this lecture. And Paramita, many congratulations. You did it so well. I think a lot of people have many questions. So, Paramita, you please share your email ID take all the questions from all of them. Also, our students have joined through another platform in the lecture. Here, I think 20-25 people are there. The students have joined separately. Take all the questions from the participants and the students and mail the questions to the three scholars, Sagar, Diksha, and Nitika, and they are going to give detailed answers as expected and share the answers with all of us. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. For our participants, I would like to inform them that please feel free to send your questions to our email address, and we would love to send it to the speakers. Thank you. And at the end, I would like to thank Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Nandini Sahu, ma'am, Dr. Sagar Kumar Sharma, Ms. Nitika Gulati, and Ms. Dikshya Samantarai, and all the participants for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nandini ma'am. Thank you, Hindi University, and thank you, Dr. Paramita, for this wonderful, wonderful session.
I can see many people are putting nice comments. Huma is sitting here. She attends all our lectures. So send your comments and your appreciation and your questions to Paramita. Paramita, please write your email ID in the chat box so that people can send them. The youngsters are delivering lectures. And like Sagar told in the beginning, too big shoes to fit in, but you did fit in. Okay. Congratulations to all three of you. I'm so
Thank you.
proud of you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank
Thank
you.
Proud to be called your scholars always.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. It's been a privilege.
Absolutely. Everyone have a lovely evening then. Probably it's time to say goodbye.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much for joining us today, and namaste.
Namaste.
Bye. Thank you.